So yesterday, KU beat MU in basketball. It's the first time they'd played in Columbia for like 10 years. They call it the Border War, but if you're not from around Kansas and Missouri, you may not realize that the Border War was actually a real thing that happened between Kansas and Missouri. So when Kansas was about to become a state, they enacted something called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which allowed that state to vote on whether they wanted to be pro-slavery or not. At the time, a lot of Missourians were pro-slavery, and a lot of people poured into Kansas to change the vote so that it would be a slave state. Now, that caused a lot of tension between Kansas and Missouri. And so what happened is there were raids from both sides. Nobody's blameless in this situation. Raids from both sides. The raiders from the Missouri side would come into Kansas and burn places and steal things and generally create chaos. They were called the Bushwhackers. And one of the most famous bands of Bushwhackers was a group called Quantrill's Raiders. They were led by William Quantrill. They had a ton of members, and you probably know some of their members because Frank and Jesse James were in Quantrill's Raiders along with the younger brothers. So, in order to cut down on these raids, some of the local authorities passed a law that said if you were aiding Quantrill's Raiders, you were arrested. Well, of course, the people that were aiding Quantrill's Raiders were their wives and other female relatives. They got put in jail, and unfortunately, the jail collapsed, and it killed 4 of these women and injured a bunch more. So, in revenge, Quantrill took his group of raiders, went across the state line, burned Lawrence, Kansas, killed a bunch of people there. If you know anything about KU, where's KU at? That's right, Lawrence, Kansas. So, the retaliation parties from Kansas would raid Missouri. They burned Osceola to the ground. The groups from Kansas were called the Jayhawkers, and they would raid back and forth throughout the Civil War. In fact, one of the largest Civil War battles was fought here right near the plaza. If you don't know anything about Kansas City, you've probably at least heard of the Plaza Lights. The Battle of Westport was fought right there. Another tie-in is that the militia formed in Columbia, Missouri, which is where MU is, the militia to protect against the Jayhawkers was called the Tigers. So the Border War goes way deeper than just some sports teams, even though we all like each other now. Anyway, if you didn't know, now you know. Oh yeah, one more thing. Rock chalk, baby!